This is information.
Hello and welcome to Visual Design on the Web. In our last two videos, we looked at an overview of web design workflow and some of the initial documentation like sitemaps and wireframes. Let's jump back into the web design workflow at the point where we take wireframes and start to work in Photoshop. Here is where we arrange that content from our client, make mockups in Photoshop with real colors, images, and type. Some of the biggest decisions in the whole process get made at this point, so have your design principles, your color theory, your contrast, motion, and noise, your typography skills, all of your bag of tricks ready. Here is where the website truly starts to come to life. A few tips about making your Photoshop comps. Tip number 1. Keep your layers and layer names organized. It sounds basic, but it will help you find stuff later on. It will really help someone else who has to go into your PSD file later, especially if your web development team has separate designers and coders. Also, use folders and groups and you'll really be organized, especially if you need to show multiple versions of a page. Even better, group the parts that stay the same throughout these multiple versions, like the header and footer. Tip number 2. Use shapes and shape layers. Most web designs can be distilled into a few key shapes, like rectangles, rounded rectangles, and lines. So shapes and shape layers are a good starting point after the wireframe. Tip number 3. Use existing resources, especially UI kits and grid systems. They can speed up the mockup process with pre-made buttons, control, navigation, and other bits and pieces. A grid system will help you line up elements. Tip number 4. Use smart objects when you can. Then you can use smart filters and won't have to worry about pixel destruction. This is a good time to review the difference between raster images and vector images. Raster images include bitmaps, JPEGs, PNGs, GIFs, or GIFs, either pronunciation you prefer. Raster images are composed of a grid of pixels, with the image file containing value and color information for each of the little pixels. If you're using a digital photograph on your website, it's best to use the JPEG format. Adobe Photoshop is the king of raster image manipulation, although these days, Photoshop can deal with vector images. A vector image is different because it relies on math to draw the image instead of knowing information about each individual pixel. For example, a square drawn in Adobe Illustrator really only technically consists of 4 corner points, and the computer uses math to fill in the rest. Most common vector images files are AI and EPS files. The vast majority of file formats used on the web are raster ones, but something called a scalable vector graphic (SVG) is becoming more and more widespread. Like our square in Illustrator, the browser takes some key points or paths and fills in the rest using math. The SVG file is basically a long text file that describes how these points and paths are drawn and then filled in. Here's the bottom line. For almost all cases, if you have a photograph or complex image on a website, a JPEG is what you should use. If you have sharp-edged line art with solid colors, like a logo, a GIF will do. If it's a short animation, then you definitely need a GIF. GIFs can only handle 256 colors at the most, so if you need more than 256 colors and/or transparency, then your best bet is a PNG. Most of the time, if I need a combination of photo and solid colors, then I use a PNG for that too.